About 1954, short track open wheel dirt racing established a foothold at a track in an Iowa cornfield, not far from Des Moines. The people of Knoxville, Iowa, gave their heart and soul collectively to the sport. And soon the speedway here developed the nation's recognized national championship race for sprint cars. And the stature of this event grows in geometric proportions every year. Logic then dictated that the National Sprint Car Hall of Fame and Museum blossom here too. The foundation started, like many American grassroots success stories, with a dream and was established as a non-profit corporation in 1986. Items are accepted either on loan or by donation and are tax deductible because of the museum's 501c3 status. The four-story, $1.7 million Hall of Fame, towering above Turn 2 of the famous Knoxville Raceway, includes 20 luxurious corporate suites with a panoramic view of the entire track. Sprint car racing, more an emotion than an activity of life. For those involved, sprint car racing is more life itself than just a mere sport. Essentially, sprint car racing has been around since the dawn of the motor car. The world's first cars were nothing more than frame rails, a seat, a gas tank, and an engine. And except for a few modifications and several generations of safety improvements, that basic automotive philosophy still breathes today and screams around hundreds of tracks weekly. Sprint cars have been recognized by various names since the turn of the century, and although the distinction between them and big track, Indianapolis-intended type machines became blurry in the 30s and 40s, sprinters are clearly in a class all of their own now. Today's sprint car is a hybrid, purebred racing machine, sole purpose. In those early days, production sedans, often open-seaters anyway, with only a semblance of fenders, were stripped down to go racing out at the fairgrounds. World War II threatened the class's survival, but with 15 years after the peace accord, the drama and excitement of sprint cars had taken a firm hold in America. Its perceived immortality by insiders was now historic fact. A few small esoteric groups had sustained the class, but now sprint car racing in the 60s was everywhere. Whatever one's familiarity or personal opinion of this narrowly banded activity within the motorsport, no one can deny sprint car racing will forever reign as America's racing nova of energy. Traditionally, sprint racing has been America's most frantic, awe-inspiring, bravado-required, and historically threatening, but also personally most rewarding arena. Today, Indy cars and Winston Cup stock cars in America may get more media attention and larger turnstile crowds for individual races, but no single activity within the sport garners more respect than these 1,200 pounds, sometimes near 800 horsepower dragons. Sprint racing has always been middle America, not just geographically mid-America, but for the common man. A dream perhaps reachable by every being, but not just any. According to the National Speedway Directory, sprint car racing boasts more race sanctioning bodies, estimated at 25, in America than any type of racing. Of the approximately 1,200 American speedways, a clear 1/3 schedule sprint car racing at least once a year. And more than 300 of these tracks are built in a Main Street USA corridor that spans Pennsylvania to Iowa. The Sprinter is the world's most versatile oval racer, capable of competing on both dirt and paved tracks from a quarter mile to 1 mile in length, from flat tracks to high bank behemoths. Each arena provides its own unique, visceral spectacle. Contemporary sprint car racing has a signature trademark, the wing. Mounted above the driver's compartment, this device is nothing more than an inverted airplane wing that, instead of creating lift, just the opposite is developed, ground-hugging downforces. Now, not every sprint car or sprint car organization uses wings, but they are more synonymous with this racing than any other. Incidentally, sprint racing's modern precursor, the Super Modified, actually invented aerofoils for racing. The first commonly accepted use was by Jim Cushman in Columbus, Ohio, 1955. That's nearly 15 years before they were considered for Indy cars. The National Sprint Car Hall of Fame and Museum in Knoxville, Iowa, is a celebration of the sprint car. Not only has the Hall of Fame gone to a great deal of effort to collect many of the actual sprint cars, artifacts, and memorabilia that have made this aspect of the sport so memorable, but it also has the actual Hall of Fame, honoring outstanding achievers in the sport of big car and sprint car racing, including those in the driver, owner mechanic, and promoter sanctioning, official media member categories. The entire nomination and election process is carried out by the 62-member National Induction Committee, which consists of media members and representatives of the major old-timers organizations from across the United States. Currently, 61 personalities reside and are pictured in the Hall of Fame, with many more to come annually. The museum also sports hundreds of pieces of memorabilia, much of it documented photographically, including approximately 25 beautifully restored antique and classic race cars on a rotating display. Now, visitors to this shrine of personal expression with a rocket-like device numbered over 23,000 the year that it opened its doors, and included representatives from all 50 states and 16 foreign countries. Two cars on display were the epitome of success in the first modern era of sprint car racing in the 1970s. This machine, co-owned by Bob Trossel and Gary Musato, entered 57 races in 1977 and won 34 times, including 13 of 15 at Knoxville, a very difficult track to put together a race-winning string. The car also won the Knoxville Nationals that year. Its driver, from Sioux Falls, South Dakota, Doug Wolfgang. Earl Wagner from nearby Pleasantville made a successful transition from super modified driving to sprint car racing. And in 1968, with this Trossel number 98, he was the mid-season Knoxville champion. In the Knoxville Nationals in August, he was third in the main event. And the car also had a very interesting moment later in the season when Lee Kunzman, on his way to Indianapolis fame, drove the car in the first annual Phoenix Western World Open, then the most successful of all the season-ending Invitational Championship events. The CAE company in California produced many sprint cars, particularly in the 1960s. This was one of the most popular and successful shipped to the Midwest. Benny Rapp, the ageless one from Toledo, Ohio, qualified in the front row of the Little 500 many times in this machine. The Little 500, 500 laps in a sprint car on a high-bank quarter-mile paved racetrack. Benny's career began in 1950, and into the 1990s, he was still going strong. Despite all those front rows at the Little 500, he never won. In 1980, an agent for several country and western singers, C.K. Spurlock, decided he wanted to get involved in sprint car racing. Not content to be just a mere car owner, he commissioned his own chassis to be built and christened it the Gambler chassis, naming it after a famous Kenny Rogers song. Danny Smith, out of Indiana, was C.K. Spurlock's first driver. Although before it was over, the greatest names in all the land of sprint car racing had driven for him before C.K.'s son, Casey, himself became a driver of stock cars and eventually NHRA. No car-driver sprint car combination has perhaps been as controversial and certainly as emotional as this, the Bill Smith Speedway Motors car fielded for Jan Opperman. Jan, with his long flowing hair and piercing eyes and constant references to both the hippie culture as well as religion, confused many, but not his wide-open driving style, which fascinated all. Now, this car campaigned from Nebraska and Iowa and won races through Ohio, Indiana, and into Pennsylvania. And a change of the fuel cell and a number and some minor modifications, and it was USAC race legal. And in 1976, Jan won a live USAC race, the Holman Classic, on ABC television. Drag racer Raymond Beadle made an all-out assault in the world of sprint car racing with these 1987 big tube Kodiak Challengers. In all, 7 were built for race driver Sammy Swindell as Beadle teamed him with Winston Cup star Rusty Wallace. Now, the cars were never prolific winners, and they were built with large-sized tubes for safety, but they were very expensive. The car did set a track record at the Indiana State Fairgrounds for a single lap at better than 132.5 miles an hour. This 1971 Floyd Trevis sprint car was nicknamed Old Blue and may have been the most pristine racer in the history of the sport. Its patriotic red, white, and blue colors were always accentuated by lots of chrome. Car owner Bob Weichert, the beef baron from the East Coast, employed Paul Pitzer and mostly Kenny Weld in this car in the early 1970s. The machine won 146 times, including twice the Knoxville Nationals and Williams Grove Nationals. Sprint cars have probably changed less than any other race car in the decade. They are remarkably similar to what they look like in the 19-teens. This Lewis Curley Wetterall creation needs little more than a roll cage and maybe a replacement engine for the 4-cylinder, 318 cubic inch Offenhauser to make it race-worthy for today's championship races. Driver Gus Schrader made this one of the most successful cars of the 1930s. In one 5-year period between 1937 and 1941, he won 4 IMCA championships.